What if a chance encounter on a quiet country road wasn't chance at all? What if a 9-year-old girl with a warm backpack and a knack for fixing engines held the key to unraveling a billionaire's darkest secrets? And what if a ruby ring, too big for her tiny hand, connected them in ways neither could have imagined? This is the story of Emily, a quiet, brilliant girl raised by a mechanic in a modest apartment, and Jack, the cold, calculated heir to a real estate empire built on lies. When their paths cross, a buried truth begins to surface, a truth that could destroy one of New York's most powerful families. Who is Emily, really? Why did a wealthy tycoon spend years watching her from the shadows? And how far will he go to protect what he's built, even if it means destroying his own blood? This is just a story about family. It's about identity, betrayal, and the courage to choose love over legacy. Don't miss a single moment of this incredible journey. Like, share, and subscribe to follow the full story. Now let's begin. The late afternoon sunlight cast long golden streaks across the quiet country road as Sophie Bennett ambled home from school. Though only 9 years old, she carried the quiet maturity of a child who had faced more trials than most of her peers. A worn-out backpack slouched over her small shoulders, filled with books and one peculiar item, a small repair kit wrapped in a faded cloth, a special gift from her uncle, Lucas. Sophie hummed a familiar tune as she walked, her feet gently kicking the pebbles along the roadside, when her eyes caught sight of a shiny black sports car parked by the edge, a Stallion GT, unmistakable from any other model. Sophie frowned slightly. That car hadn't been there this morning when she'd gone to school. Now it sat idle. The hood popped open, as if bearing its helplessness. Next to the car stood a well-dressed man in an expensive suit, pacing anxiously, a phone pressed tightly to his ear. "I don't care what meeting I'm missing." His voice rang out, tense. "I'm stuck on River Bend 9. The car won't start, and clearly no one's coming to fix it for hours." Sophie slowed her pace, eyes sharp and observant. This man looked completely out of place in the humble countryside of Ellenshire, the small town where she lived. The suit he wore probably cost more than what Uncle Lucas made in a month at the repair shop. His hair was immaculately styled, and Sophie caught the glint of metal from his wristwatch every time he waved his hand in frustration. "Fine. I'll handle it myself," the man muttered before hanging up, shoving the phone into his pocket. He turned back to the car, staring into the engine bay as if willing things to fix themselves by sheer focus. His helplessness stirred Sophie's instinct to help. Uncle Lucas always said, "Knowing something and not sharing it when someone needs it means nothing at all." "Can I help you, sir?" Sophie asked, taking cautious steps toward the vehicle. The man turned around in surprise. He was Nathan Hale, 35 years old, a wealthy real estate mogul well known in the capital city of Bridgeford. In meetings, his name commanded respect, even fear. But now, he was utterly powerless before his stalled car and being approached by an elementary school girl. "Just a small hiccup." Nathan forced a smile. "Nothing serious. You should probably head home." Sophie shrugged and stepped closer to peer into the engine. "I know a little about cars, sir. My uncle's a mechanic. He's taught me a lot." Nathan chuckled lightly. "That's adorable. But this is a high-performance vehicle. It needs a professional." "Maybe," Sophie replied, gently setting her backpack on the ground. "But a professional is just someone who knows how to find the real problem, without waiting for permission." She crouched near the car's edge, careful not to dirty her school uniform. Nathan watched, amused at first, then gradually astonished as he saw her eyes sharpen like a seasoned mechanic inspecting a fault. When did the problem start? She asked, now fully immersed in the task. About 20 minutes ago, Nathan answered, instinctively matching her seriousness. The engine started overheating oddly, then just shut off. Sophie nodded as if solving a difficult puzzle. Did you smell something sweet, like syrup? Nathan furrowed his brow. Yeah, actually. How did you... It's the cooling system, Sophie said, pointing to a small puddle beneath the car that Nathan hadn't noticed. I'm guessing it's a coolant leak. That's why it overheated. Nathan turned to look at her, then down at the puddle, as if his entire world was tilting. Her knowledge and calmness stunned him. How old are you? He asked. 9, Sophie answered, already rummaging through her backpack. I carry a mini rescue kit. Uncle Lucas insists I always be ready. When she pulled out a special tape and a packet of sealant for coolant system leaks. Nathan could only watch silently. Sophie located the exact leak spot and went to work with practiced hands. As she worked, she explained everything gently, as though she were the adult and he the apprentice. All done, she said, wiping her hands with a small cloth from her pocket. Wait about 10 minutes before starting the engine again, and make sure to refill the coolant. Nathan, a man used to shaking up multi-million-dollar deals, now found himself silently obeying a 9-year-old. He carefully poured water from a bottle in his car into the coolant reservoir, all under Sophie's attentive gaze. Nathan, he said, extending his hand. Nathan Hale. Sophie Bennett, she replied, shaking his hand with surprising confidence. Nice to meet you, Mr. Hale. As their hands touched, a deep red flash gleamed from Sophie's finger. An old ring with a ruby stone, clearly too large for her hand, was held in place with thin thread wound around it. Nathan froze. That ring, he whispered. Something about it was eerily familiar. His heart clenched with a vague but powerful feeling, a memory fighting its way to the surface. Though he couldn't yet name it, Sophie Bennett's hair was neatly tied back in a simple ponytail, revealing her thin cheeks and a smudge on the left side of her face, something she probably hadn't even noticed yet. There it is, she said, her voice full of delight as she pulled out a roll of technical tape and a packet of specialized sealant for plugging leaks in the cooling system. This should hold it for now until you can get a real mechanic to take a look. It won't last long, but it's good enough to get you into town. Nathan Hale just stood there, silent. He couldn't utter a word as the little girl pinpointed the exact location of the leaking hose and got to work. Sophie moved with practiced ease, each motion calm and deliberate, as if she were the adult and he the child, being guided. All done, she said after a few minutes, wiping her hands with a small cloth she kept in her toolkit. Wait about 10 minutes before starting the engine again. In the meantime, you should top off the coolant that was lost. Nathan simply did as the little girl instructed. He carefully poured bottled water from the car into the reservoir, while Sophie stood beside him, arms crossed, her expression so serious that it made him chuckle inwardly, even though he hadn't completely shaken off his tension. My name's Nathan Hale, he said, reaching out his hand a bit awkwardly. Sophie Bennett, the girl replied, shaking his hand with a firmness that momentarily caught him off guard. Nice to meet you, Mr. Hale. As their hands met, Nathan suddenly noticed a deep red glint on Sophie's finger. A ring with a dark ruby stone, clearly far too large for her tiny hand, was fastened in place with a thin thread wound tightly around it. Nathan froze. For a split second, the world around him seemed to tilt. That ring, he murmured. There was something odd, the feeling of seeing a long-buried memory ignite back to life. This ring used to belong to my mom, Sophie said gently, eyes dropping to the ground. She said it was the symbol of a very important promise. Her face fell, her eyes shimmering. She passed away last year. I'm sorry, Nathan replied almost instinctively, though his mind was spinning. Why did a simple ring bring such a tightness to his chest? Why did looking at it make his heart ache, like someone was squeezing it in their fist? Just then, the sound of the engine hummed steadily. The car had started again, breaking the strange moment. Sophie beamed with joy, while Nathan remained lost in a whirlpool of thoughts. A part of him knew this moment was no longer just a random encounter. "Let me give you a ride," he said after a few seconds of silence, surprising even himself with the offer. "After all, you just saved me from a major disaster." Sophie hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Thanks. It is a bit of a long walk, actually." The Stallion GT slowly rolled off the roadside. Neither of them could have guessed that this short ride would unravel a journey tied to secrets buried for over a decade and would forever alter the course of their lives. As Nathan drove, he occasionally glanced at Sophie. Every time sunlight touched the ruby on her hand, memories surged back like sharp fragments piercing through his thoughts. A past he thought he had left behind suddenly felt vividly alive. That ring. "It's quite special," Nathan said, breaking the silence. "Do you know where your mom got it from?" Sophie gently turned the ring on her finger, a habit she'd picked up ever since her mother had given it to her the year before. She only said it was from someone very important. "She told me to take good care of it," said one day. "I'd understand why it mattered so much." Nathan tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. "When we get there. Now, would you mind if I took a closer look at it?" Sophie nodded, her eyes showing no hesitation. There was something fragile in Mr. Hale's voice, very unlike the commanding presence of a man who likely owned nearly everything in life. When they stopped in front of an old but tidy building, Sophie swiftly slipped off the ring and handed it to Nathan. The thread wrapped to make it fit her small hand loosened a little, revealing the tarnished gold band beneath. Nathan held his breath. The blood-red ruby was surrounded by swirling patterns. Tiny vines and leaves were intricately carved along the band, and he knew, if you looked closely enough, the patterns formed the letter O, Nathan whispered, barely audible. "Olivia Hale. This ring, this is the exact one I gave to a girl named Lily 15 years ago, at an orphanage called Sun Hill House," Nathan Hale said, his voice barely a whisper. "What did you say?" Sophie Bennett asked in surprise, her eyes widening. Nathan kept staring intently at the ruby ring in the girl's hand, his expression filled with disbelief. "I promised I'd come back for her, and now I think it's you," Sun Hill Sophie repeated, her face gradually turning pale. "I remember my mom used to mention that name in her sleep. A lot. Usually when she was having nightmares." Nathan carefully returned the ring, his hands trembling. "Your mother was Catherine Bennett, right? Did she used to be a nurse there?" Sophie nodded softly. "Before she adopted me, she worked at a place like that. But I was only 2 then, so I don't remember much." Nathan's mind spiraled into a storm. Everything, the timeline, the ring. Today's unexpected encounter, it was all too coincidental, to be mere chance. "Sophie." I think he paused, hesitant. This child's life was already complicated enough should he stir it further with guesses he wasn't yet sure of. "I think there may be things about your mother that you haven't been told, and maybe about me too." Before Sophie could respond, the door to the apartment swung open. A man in his early 40s rushed out, his face a mix of worry and relief. "Sophie, where have you been? You're over an hour late." I was about to call the police. He stopped abruptly when he saw Nathan standing beside the luxury car. Uncle Lucas, Sophie quickly said. This is Mr. Nathan Hale. His car broke down, and I helped him fix it. He gave me a ride back. Lucas looked at Nathan with cautious eyes, the eyes of someone who had seen enough wealthy people come and go to know that money didn't always mean trustworthiness. Thanks for bringing her home, he said seriously, not quite warm, but not overtly hostile either. Sophie's brilliant, Nathan replied, extending his hand. She saved me from having to sleep on the roadside. Lucas shook his hand, nodding without a word. Actually, I'd really like to talk with both of you, Nathan continued, about Sophie's mother and things she might have done in the past. Lucas froze, his gaze darkening. Why would someone like you care about that? Nathan exhaled quietly, pulling a business card from his pocket and handing it over. It's a long story, but I have a feeling it's important to all of us. As the Stallion GT pulled away from the old apartment complex, Sophie stood beside Lucas, watching the car disappear into the distance. The ruby ring on her hand suddenly felt heavier. She couldn't explain the sensation, but deep inside, she knew from the moment she stopped to help that man on the roadside, her life had taken a turn, one that would change it forever. Across the city of Bridgeford, inside a towering skyscraper owned by the Hale Consortium, Nathan stepped into a private elevator. His hand trembled slightly as he slid the keycard into the reader. Since meeting Sophie, the entire day had felt like a cascade of reawakened memories. As the elevator climbed to the 52nd floor, he closed his eyes, letting himself sink into the past. The image of a 7-year-old boy standing silently in the cold hallway of the Hale mansion came back to him, eavesdropping on a conversation between his adoptive father, Gerald Hale, and his adoptive mother, Olivia. That boy needs discipline, not affection. He'll thank us when he's running this company. The elevator stopped. The doors opened, bringing Nathan back to the present, into a lavish but soulless penthouse, where everything was arranged with such perfection it had squeezed out all traces of warmth. He walked over to the bar, poured himself a glass of whiskey when a voice spoke from behind him. There you are. It was Vivian Huntington, his fiancée. She stood there, elegant in an evening gown. The Andersons have called twice asking about the merger agreement. She continued, and the wedding planner needs confirmation on the floral arrangements. Nathan could barely hear her. His mind was still stuck on the ruby ring, on the small girl with the strangely wise eyes. Vivian, he said, do you remember me ever mentioning a place called Sun Hill House? She raised an eyebrow. That orphanage your mother used to donate to. Why Nathan didn't answer. He walked into his study, where a small wooden box was hidden behind a row of business trophies. Inside, it was a faded photo, a Polaroid. In the picture was Nathan, around 16 years old, holding hands with a curly-haired girl, her eyes sparkling with a bright smile. Her name was Lily, the girl he had promised he'd come back for, back across town, in the tiny kitchen of their old apartment. Lucas was making a simple dinner while Sophie sat quietly at the table, still turning the ruby ring on her finger. Are you sure he recognized the ring? Lucas asked, trying to keep his voice even. Sophie nodded slowly. He said he once gave an identical ring to a girl named Lily at a place called Sun Hill, just like the name Mom used to mention in her dreams. Lucas' hand, stirring the vegetables in the pan, suddenly stopped for a few seconds. My mom didn't talk much about that place. She only said it shut down suddenly, and that she adopted me right after that. Sophie Bennett said softly. She bent down and unzipped her backpack, pulling out an old notebook with a cracked spine and pages curled from age. I found Mom's journal after she passed away, Sophie said, flipping through several faded pages. There's a part where she wrote that some documents were stored in a bank, and that there were truths that needed to be uncovered. She looked up at Lucas, her eyes clear but carrying a depth far beyond her age. Do you think it has something to do with Mr. Nathan Lucas tightened his grip on the pot handle, sitting on the stove. His face suddenly darkened. I don't know, he replied after a moment of silence. But men like him, they don't care about folks like us unless they have a reason to. Sophie gave a small nod. He looked sad. She said simply, Meanwhile, across Bridgeford. Nathan Hale sat in front of his computer, accessing the internal archives of the Hale Consortium. His eyes scanned through hundreds of files, fingers swiftly typing in the name Sun Hill House. When the results appeared, his blood seemed to freeze. The file clearly stated 15 years ago, Gerald Hale. His father had purchased the land where Sun Hill House once stood, just weeks after Nathan's last visit to see Lily. The official reason was financial difficulty, but in a handwritten internal note, he found something far more troubling. Handled completely. Liquidation files finalized. No trace left. A note in Gerald's handwriting. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. The father he had once admired, once trusted implicitly, had hidden something monstrous. And Sophie, why was she wearing that ring? Dawn settled over the city. On opposite ends of life, one in a marble-paved penthouse, the other in a cramped, aging apartment. Both Nathan and Sophie lay awake, minds full of the same questions. Neither yet knew that their fates had been intertwined for years, and the quest for truth might take them to the edge of danger. Nathan stepped out of the bathroom, hot steam still clinging to the mirror. He wiped his face, staring at the reflection, a wealthy, successful man, but with eyes that felt like a stranger's. From the bedroom, Vivian Huntington's voice rang out. Darling, the Huntingtons confirmed dinner. My father wants to push the merger announcement to coincide with our wedding. Nathan closed his eyes, his heart clenching like it was being squeezed. The wedding. In the press. They were the royal couple of real estate. A marriage of strategy and power, not love. Even the 6-carat ring glittering on Vivian's hand felt like a shackle. I need to handle something first, he called back, his voice echoing through the cold, spacious air. It's always work. Vivian sighed, her voice tinged with bitterness, something Nathan chose to ignore. He dressed in another tailored suit, flawless as ever, and left without breakfast. To the Central Archives, he told his driver. Now. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment in the Westford district. Sophie awoke to the clatter of pots and pans. She walked into the kitchen, where Lucas was flipping eggs in an old skillet. Their apartment had nothing of real value peeling walls, a ceiling stained with water spots, furniture well past its prime, but it was full of warmth. Something Nathan, despite his life in luxury, had never truly known. Framed photos of Catherine and Sophie lined one small wall the first day of school, their first Christmas, birthdays with homemade cakes, simple moments, yet precious as gold. Morning, kiddo. Lucas smiled. Eggs are ready. I've got 2 shifts today, so Mrs. Sims next door will check in on you after school. He paused, glancing at the pensive look on her face. You're still thinking about him, the man with the fancy car. Sophie nodded gently, her fingers instinctively touching the ruby ring. He knows things. Uncle. About Mom. About where I came from. Lucas sighed, his weathered face, shaped by years of labor and life, softened. Your mother loved you more than anything in this world. Sophie. Nothing changes that. I know, she replied quietly. But don't you think it's strange? He recognized the ring. He knew about Sunhill. Lucas looked at her, then turned away, his eyes growing distant. Maybe this is bigger than we think. Kiddo. Lucas sighed, glancing at the clock. All right, then. After my shift, well, go through your mom's things together. Maybe there's something we've missed all this time. He picked up his worn leather jacket and jangling ring of keys. But remember this, Sophie, be careful with people like Mr. Hale. The rich live in a world completely different from ours. After Lucas left, Sophie Bennett returned to her bed and reopened Catherine's journal, the mother she loved and trusted. The passages that once seemed cryptic now became chillingly clear. I can't leave the girl in that place. Not after what I heard. Some promises are worth sacrificing everything. The documents are safely stored. When she's old enough to understand, she'll need them to find her way. Sophie turned to the final page. There, taped carefully with old adhesive, was a small key her mother had secured. She had once thought it was just decoration, but now she began to believe it might open more than just a box. Across the city of Bridgeford, Nathan Hale sat inside the internal archives room of the Hale Consortium. The room was icy from overpowered air conditioning and lined with shelves stacked high with labeled boxes. He could have assigned the task to an assistant or data management team, but Nathan didn't trust anyone, not for this. Hours had passed. Finally, he found a file labeled Sunhill Acquisition. Inside were land transfer agreements, redevelopment plans, and a photo that froze him in place. A picture of the Sunhill house building, taken before its demolition. The very place he had seen in his dreams for the last 15 years. Under the documents was a thick envelope, sealed and marked G.H. Personal. Gerald Hale. Nathan knew opening it meant crossing a point of no return. But he tore the seal anyway. Inside were birth records, adoption files, and a list of children with handwritten notes beside each promising, unsuitable, relocated, special case. And then, in bold red ink, one name stood out: Lily Sullivan's special handling per G.H.'s directive. The phone in Nathan's pocket buzzed. It was Vivian, again reminding him about the dinner and the business merger. He ignored it. His hands trembled as he kept reading. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. A horrifying picture began to form. His father wasn't just an ambitious businessman. He had manipulated the lives of children like chess pieces. Among them was Lily, the girl who had vanished from all records the very day Nathan gave her the ruby ring. Nathan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: pure, unfiltered rage. Not performance, not repression. The game his father had orchestrated had now pulled Sophie into its web. And now, so was he. The next afternoon, the heavy doors of River Street Bank creaked open as Lucas and Sophie stepped inside. Lucas had taken off early after that morning's conversation. His mind couldn't focus on anything else. "Are you sure this is what your mom wanted?" Lucas whispered, eyes scanning the marble-tiled lobby. Banks had always made him feel out of place. Sophie clutched the journal tightly to her chest. She wrote it clearly here. "The truth is locked at Riverbank, and you have the key. It has to be a safe deposit box." At the service counter, a middle-aged manager with a wary gaze examined the documents: Catherine's death certificate, Lucas's guardianship order, and the small key. "Unusual," she muttered, peering over her steel-rimmed glasses. "But the paperwork appears to be in order. Please follow me." They were led into a private room lined with small metal boxes, each numbered. When the manager inserted their key and the bank's master key into box 1724, it clicked open with a sharp snap. "He'll leave you alone," she said, gently closing the door behind her. Lucas carefully lifted the lid. Inside was a yellow envelope, a small wooden box, and a sealed letter labeled in Catherine's familiar handwriting, "For Sophie. Open when you found your way back." Sophie's hands shook as she opened the letter. The words inside brought tears streaming down her cheeks. "I always knew you weren't the child everyone thought you were." The letter revealed the truth. Catherine had once been head nurse at Sun Hill House. One night, she accidentally overheard a conversation between Gerald Hale and the orphanage director. They were planning a special use for a girl named Lily. Unable to let it happen, Catherine took the girl and severed all ties with the past. Emily Bennett had overheard a conversation between Gerald Hale and the director of Sun Hill House about a special arrangement for a child named Lily. Fearing for the girl's safety, Catherine didn't hesitate. That very night, she left the orphanage with Lily in her arms, changed her name, and began a new life far from the city of Bridgeford. Inside the yellow envelope kept in the safety deposit box were adoption papers clearly forged, along with original documents that Catherine had risked everything to take. Among them, the birth certificate of Lily Hale, daughter of Olivia and Gerald Hale. No way. Lucas breathed, his face drained of color. Gerald Hale is one of the most powerful men in Bridgeford. You're saying he's your real father? Sophie Bennett stood frozen, her eyes locked on the birth certificate. Everything around her spun. "And if those are Mr. Nathan's parents," then she whispered, "then is your brother." Lucas finished, his voice hoarse. "Your brother, who found you after all these years inside the remaining small wooden box." They discovered an old newspaper clipping about Olivia Hale's charitable work, a photo of her holding a child at a public event. In the margin, handwritten in faded ink, "I never stopped looking for you." Meanwhile, in his private office on the top floor of Hale Tower, Nathan Hale sat frozen in front of his computer screen. The latest report from his private investigative team had arrived, and he couldn't believe what he was reading. Old personnel files from Sun Hill House confirmed that Emily Bennett had submitted her resignation the very day the orphanage was shut down. In her letter, she cited serious ethical disagreements, but internal notes listed her as uncooperative, potentially disruptive. Worse still, what the files didn't say, there was no trace of Lily after the orphanage closure. It was as if she had vanished from all systems. Nathan opened a drawer and pulled out an old wooden box identical to the one Sophie had just discovered. Inside was a faded photo, his mother, Olivia, cradling a newborn. He had found this picture years ago in her drawer, but had never fully understood its significance. On the back, in Olivia's handwriting, Lily Elizabeth Hale, born 4:17 a.m., Mommy's perfect angel. The intercom buzzed, startling Nathan. "Mr. Hale, your father is waiting outside." Nathan quickly returned the photo to the box and nodded. "Send him in." Gerald Hale entered with the air of a man who didn't just own the room, but the entire building. At 65, he still radiated power, silver hair, custom suit, and a gaze that weighed every person down. "Nathan," he said, sitting without being invited. "Vivian tells me you've been distracted lately. Something about old property files." Nathan kept his expression calm, though his heart pounded. "I've been reviewing project history. Sun Hill Plaza made me think about what used to be there." Gerald's eyes narrowed. The past isn't worth wasting time on. What matters is the future of the Hale Consortium, and your role in preserving my legacy along with Vivian. The word legacy echoed in Nathan's mind. Once a source of pride. Now, a stain. Yes, sir, he replied smoothly. Just tying up loose ends. Gerald stood, adjusting his lapel. Some things are better left buried. Son, focus on what truly matters. At the door. He paused, speaking without turning back. And Nathan, stay away from Westford. Nothing good ever comes from that place. The door shut behind him. Nathan stood still, blood chilling in his veins. His father knew. About Sophie. About the visit. About everything. This game was far more dangerous than he had thought, but for the first time in his life, he was ready to fight. That night, instead of returning home, Nathan drove to an unmarked hotel in Midtown, paid in cash, and rented a room. Then he made 3 phone calls, one to his most trusted private investigator, one to his personal lawyer, and one to Sophie's apartment. Lucas answered, his voice guarded. I need to meet with both of you, Nathan said urgently. Not at your place somewhere secure, but private. It's about what you've just uncovered. How do you know what we uncovered? Lucas demanded. How do you know what we found? Lucas asked, his voice thick with suspicion. Because I've found some things too, Nathan Hale replied firmly. And I believe all of us are in danger. An hour later, they met in a quiet diner on the outskirts of Westford. Sophie Bennett clutched her backpack tightly in her lap. Inside were all of Catherine's documents they had just uncovered. Her eyes were full of confusion and 1,000 questions as Nathan sat down across from her. I think you're my brother, Sophie said, skipping any formal greeting. Nathan nodded slowly. And I believe my father, Gerald Hale, has hidden your existence for the past 15 years. But why Lucas placed a protective hand on Sophie's shoulder, his gaze still wary. In her letter, your mother said there was something special about you. Nathan continued. He called it a special arrangement. Do you know what that means? Nathan's expression darkened. My father doesn't do anything without purpose. The children at Sun Hill House weren't just adopted. They were selected. Selected. Lucas frowned. For what I don't know everything yet. But the timing of the orphanage's closure matches up exactly with Hale Consortium's restructuring and its preparation to go public. You mean Sophie tilted her head, confused. In a world where power and wealth are passed through bloodlines, Nathan explained, having a child who carries the true Hale blood would be a secret weapon. Lucas suddenly understood. His face turned pale. He kept her as insurance. Nathan nodded heavily. Or leverage. Or he hesitated, unwilling to say the darker thought aloud. Sophie pulled out her mother's letter from the backpack. She wrote that she overheard Mr. Gerald saying, I had a mission, and that something important would happen when I turned 18. Nathan checked his watch. That's less than 9 years from now. What do we do now? Lucas asked. We need proof, something that even my father's army of lawyers can't deny. Tomorrow, I'm meeting my mother. Olivia? She might know something. Sophie's eyes widened. My birth mother Nathan hesitated, then shook his head. You can't come. It's too dangerous. He always has someone watching her. But I'll tell her about you. He looked at Sophie, his voice softening. She never stopped looking for you. I once found a whole box of private investigations she kept hidden. Sophie blinked, holding back tears. All these years I thought a waiter approached, setting down coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for Sophie. Nathan glanced out the window. A black car was slowly rolling past. We have to go. "Now," he said urgently. "Out the back." They slipped through the kitchen and into the alley behind the diner. Lucas grabbed Nathan's arm just before they reached the car. "What have you pulled us into?" Hale Nathan turned, his eyes steady. "The truth, and my father will do anything to bury it." The next morning, sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Gabriel Church, where Olivia Hale went for Thursday confessions. This routine allowed her to meet Nathan without raising Gerald's suspicions. Olivia entered, wearing large sunglasses and a baseball cap. At 58, she still carried an air of refined grace, but Nathan noticed her hands trembling slightly as she sat beside him. "Nathan," she whispered, "your message said it was urgent." "What's wrong?" "I found her." "Mom," Nathan said gently, "I found Lily." Olivia froze, her face stunned. "That's not possible. Your father said she died." "Another one of his lies." Nathan replied, "She's alive. Catherine Bennett saved her, raised her." Tears streamed down Olivia's cheeks beneath her sunglasses. "The girl, how is she? Is she well? Her name is Sophie now. She's 9, very smart, and she has your eyes." "And the ring?" Olivia asked softly. Nathan nodded. "The one I gave her. She still has it." Olivia pulled off her glove, revealing an identical ring, a deep red ruby glinting on her finger. "It was your grandmother's. There were 2, one for each of them." Nathan froze. "Each of them?" Olivia nodded slowly. "Lily is one of a pair. She has a twin sister." "I never knew," Olivia Hale said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It was Gerald who made me believe that only one of my daughters had survived. I was under heavy anesthesia during the delivery. When I woke up, everything had already been arranged. There was a death certificate, a small funeral." Nathan fell silent. Why would he separate the twins? Why send Lily to Sunhill, only to hide her away like that? Olivia's voice deepened. Control, leverage. Gerald's grandfather had an unhealthy obsession with twins. He believed they shared a bond beyond science. When Gerald found out I was carrying 2 identical girls, he began planning. What kind of plan? Nathan urged. "A backup plan," she whispered. "Gerald built his empire on deals that could never withstand scrutiny. If you ever betrayed him, he needed a duplicate, someone with the same DNA, ready to replace you at any time." Nathan shivered. Lily was the contingency, a genetic mirror, raised separately, but always under his control. Nathan turned away, choking down the wave of nausea. "And the other child?" Elizabeth Olivia shook her head, her voice trembling. "Gerald told me she had died. But after everything you've just told me, I'm not sure anymore." A janitor walked past, making Olivia flinch. She clutched Nathan's hand, her tone taut with urgency. "I can't stay long. Gerald monitors every step I take." She paused, tightening her grip. "Be careful. Nathan, there's more going on than even I know. If you want the truth, go to his private study. There's a hidden safe in his office. Everything's in there." As she stood up, Nathan asked, "Do you want to meet Lily, meet Sophie?" For the first time, Olivia's calm veneer cracked. A sob escaped her throat. "More than anything. But not yet. Not while she's in danger. Not while we're both still his targets." That afternoon, Gerald Hale summoned Nathan to the top floor of Hale Tower. When Nathan entered the lavish office, he found his father staring intently at a screen. Surveillance footage clearly showed Nathan sitting beside Olivia at St. Gabriel's Church. "Interesting venue," Gerald said, turning the monitor toward his son. "Care to explain why you're feeding your mother fairy tales about a dead daughter?" Nathan clenched his fists. He now understood the game had shifted. His father wasn't just a man of secrets, he was dangerous. And somewhere across the city, Sophie might already be in harm's way. Nathan ducked into the executive floor's restroom and called Lucas. He knows. He knows about Sophie and about my meeting with my mother. What did he say? Lucas asked urgently, the line crackling. Enough to make it clear he has eyes everywhere. Nathan replied, checking each stall to ensure they were alone. And I've found something else. Sophie Lilly has a twin sister named Elizabeth. You're saying there could be another child who was hidden? Lucas asked slowly, as if not believing his own words. Yes. I'm not certain yet. But if it's true, then what we know is just the tip of the iceberg. Lucas was quiet for a moment, then said, Tonight. I'll take Sophie to my cousin's house in Jersey. It's safe there. He paused, his voice growing grave. Do you know Daniel Catherine's younger brother Nathan froze? Yes. I saw his name in one of Gerald's surveillance logs. Lucas exhaled sharply. He was an old war buddy of mine. Died in a car crash 10 years ago, but I always had doubts. Catherine begged me not to dig into it, because of Sophie. Nathan felt a chill down his spine. Gerald's been tracking your family for years, Lucas muttered. Then this is bigger than just Sophie. Nathan nodded to himself. I think my father has been manipulating the lives of others for decades. That night, Gerald attended a charity gala, the perfect opportunity for Nathan. With his executive pass card, Nathan slipped into his father's private office. The room was silent, illuminated only by the reflection of a large family portrait hanging above the fireplace. Gerald's hand resting firmly on Nathan's shoulder, a symbol of legacy. Behind the painting was a wall safe. The first code Nathan tried was Gerald's birth date, incorrect. Next, the founding date of the company, wrong again. Finally, he took a chance the date he was legally adopted into the Hale family. A sharp click echoed in the silence. The final code. Nathan tried the date he was officially adopted into the Hale family, triggered a soft click from the wall safe as it opened. Inside were neatly organized folders, categorized with chilling precision, wasting no time. Nathan pulled out his phone and began photographing each page rapidly. One thick file was labeled Special Adoptions, another, Genetic Research, and a separate stack Contingency Assets. Every line of information twisted Nathan's stomach. Gerald Hale had secretly arranged dozens of adoptions from various orphanages. The children weren't chosen randomly. They were selected based on genetic traits, adaptability, and perceived potential. But the most disturbing file was labeled Twin Study. It detailed unethical experiments raising genetically identical children in controlled, opposing environments to measure the influence of nature versus nurture. Another document titled Hale Succession nearly made Nathan stop breathing. Inside was a full plan for Sophie's future elite education, psychological conditioning, and even scheduled medical procedures in adolescence, all meant to prepare her to succeed Nathan should he ever become inadequate. And at the bottom, a final file titled simply, Elizabeth. Inside was a single death certificate and a photograph of a newborn. On the back, in Gerald's cold, jagged handwriting, tissue sample stored under refrigeration Hale Medical Research. Access code 7729. Nathan barely had time to recover when his phone buzzed. A message from Lucas Black Cars watching the apartment. We slipped out the back. Safe. Where are you? Before he could reply, the office lights flicked on. Nathan turned. Vivian Huntington stood in the doorway, still in her evening gown, clearly just back from the gala. I knew you were hiding something, Vivian said calmly, her eyes scanning the chaos of papers in the open safe. What are you doing? Nathan. Nathan slipped the phone into his pocket. You wouldn't understand. Vivian stepped forward. Try me. Because right now, I'm the only person who can help you. Your father sent security looking for you 10 minutes ago. Nathan studied her, searching for signs of betrayal. They had been engaged for years, but he had never been certain if Vivian stood with him or with Gerald. Why would you help me? He asked. For the first time, Vivian's flawless exterior cracked. Because I know what he does to people who try to leave, she said softly. And I'm tired of being treated like a valuable asset in the Hale investment portfolio. She glanced at her gleaming engagement ring. We're both pawns. I just figured it out sooner than you did. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. There was no time. Nathan gathered the documents, holding them tightly to his chest. My father has manipulated the lives of hundreds of children, he whispered, including my sister, actually my twin. He tore apart a family just to run an experiment, and it goes further than that. Vivian nodded, not needing further explanation. Take the service stairs to the basement. I'll tell them I saw you go up to the rooftop. She slipped off her heels, her face cold and composed. Go, now. As Nathan raced down the back corridor, files clutched to his chest. He knew one thing: the war had begun. His father had spent decades building an empire from secrets and manipulation. But now, an unlikely alliance was forming to dismantle it. A young orphan girl, a battle-worn mechanic, a high-society woman forced into a gilded cage, and the son who finally saw the truth. The only question was, would they survive long enough to expose it all? That night, in a 24-hour diner in Woodbury, New Jersey, Nathan met again with Lucas and Sophie. He looked worn from the escape. As he slid into the booth, the vinyl seat squeaked under his weight. He placed a USB drive on the table. Everything I found in his safe, Nathan said quietly, including this. He pushed a photo toward Sophie, an image of a newborn baby girl. Sophie's hand trembled as she picked it up. My twin sister, she whispered. Mom never told me. Maybe she didn't know, Lucas said gently. Catherine took you in the middle of the night. She didn't have time to dig. Nathan nodded. From what I've read, Gerald separated you at birth, told Olivia that Elizabeth had died, and sent you, Lily, to Sunhill House for surveillance. But why would he do that? Sophie asked, her eyes glistening. What for? Nathan slowly shook his head. We've all asked that question, and now it's time to find the real answer. She's only 9. Lucas hesitated. Do you really think she should know how much darkness has shaped her life? Nathan understood the look in his eyes. He nodded subtly. Sophie, why don't you go over to the jukebox and try picking a song? Lucas said, trying to keep his voice casual. As Sophie walked away from the table, Nathan immediately spoke, his tone hushed, nearly a whisper. My father's been conducting something truly sick. The documents I found mention raising identical twins in controlled and contrasting environments to test the influence of genetics and upbringing. There are psychological evaluations, intelligence assessments, even scheduled medical procedures planned for when she hits puberty. Lucas clenched his fists. Dear God, what about Elizabeth? The other twin, Nathan's voice lowered. The death certificate seems valid, but there's a note referencing a tissue sample stored in cold preservation. You think he used her tissue for research? Lucas asked, though the answer was clear. Nathan nodded. It's connected to a Hale-owned medical research center. We have to go to the police, Lucas snapped. With a bunch of documents I stole? Nathan shook his head. Going up against one of the most powerful men in Bridgeford, we need irrefutable proof and a witness. He paused. The head of Sun Hill House might know something. Dr. Margaret Winters. Lucas nodded slowly. Catherine mentioned her once. I think she moved to Boston after the orphanage closed. Sophie returned to the table, sitting down. Did you know the ruby ring has a secret? She asked, twisting the ring until a small click sounded. A hidden compartment popped open from the base of the ring, revealing a microfilm chip no bigger than a fingernail. Both men froze. Nathan carefully removed it. We need to find a way to read this. It might be the key to everything. A few hours later, in a 24/7 copy shop, they huddled around a microfilm reader. One by one, symbols and type scrolled across the dim green screen. It was a ledger, payment records, dates, code names, all linked to a project named Project Gemini. Most horrifying of all was the signature at the bottom of each disbursement, Gerald Hale. It's a bribe ledger, Nathan said, tasting each word like ash. Payments to officials to look the other way when he bought land and shut down orphanages. Payments to doctors to falsify death records. Payments to stop investigations. Lucas pointed to an entry. D. Bennett neutralized 50 UOSRs. He whispered, my God. He paid to have Catherine's brother killed. Sophie, silent until now, suddenly spoke. This name keeps showing up. Who's Victoria? Nathan froze. Vivian Huntington. My fiancée. He stared at the next line. And according to this, she's been secretly reporting on me to Gerald for years. The first hint of dawn glowed beyond the horizon. 3 people, bound by secrets and lies, sat side by side, knowing a major decision loomed ahead. The new plan could either set them free or destroy them all. At a small cabin in Ridgepine, on the property of a relative of Lucas. Nathan sat before breakfast, holding a large newspaper. The groundbreaking ceremony for Sun Hill Plaza splashed across every financial page. Perfect, Nathan said, circling the date and time. Everyone will be there, the press, business leaders, even the governor. Sophie looked up from the notebook where she was documenting every piece of evidence. You're planning to expose him at his own event. Lucas frowned. That's risky. Security will be tight. That's why we need help, Nathan replied, unfolding a hand-drawn map of the stage. I've reached out to Dr. Winters. She's agreed to testify about how the children were selected, the deleted records, and Gerald's role. Can we trust her? Lucas asked. She used to run the orphanage. She was a pawn too, Nathan said. Gerald threatened to revoke her medical license unless she complied. She's lived with the guilt for 15 years. Sophie held up the microfilm. What about Vivian? If she's been tracking you all this time. Nathan hesitated. I don't know anymore. He pulled out his phone and opened a hidden message from Vivian. I found emails from your father. Your car accident was staged. He's been tracking Sophie for years. Be careful. Do you really think she's changed sides? Lucas asked. Doubt clear in his voice, Nathan replied firmly. I think Vivian is just another victim of my father's manipulation. But she has what we need: access. The plan they drew up was bold. Vivian would ensure Nathan's name was on the list of speakers at the Sun Hill Plaza groundbreaking. A surprise speech, under the guise of announcing the future CEO and a staged engagement. Lucas would be disguised as a logistics staff member, responsible for audio and projection equipment. Dr. Winters would arrive carrying files proving Gerald's orphanage manipulation system, and Sophie, their trump card, would remain hidden until the decisive moment. What about my sister? Sophie asked softly. Elizabeth. Nathan hesitated. I've identified the facility where the genetic samples are stored. After the ceremony, if we can bring down Gerald, we'll have legal grounds to fully investigate. As dusk fell, They finalized the last preparations. Temporary phones were distributed to each of them. Contingency plans were in place. Every piece of evidence had been backed up and stored in multiple secure locations. "If anything happens to me," Nathan told Lucas, "take Sophie to my mother. She's at the Harrington Hotel under her maiden name Wilson." Lucas nodded. "And if anything happens to me or Sophie, you know what to do. Burn the Hale empire to the ground." Nathan whispered. Little Sophie, who had been quiet all this time, finally spoke up. "No matter what happens after tomorrow, we'll be together, a real family." The two men fell silent. In that moment, they understood that this battle was just about exposing the truth. It was about reclaiming the life that had been stolen from them. As the three of them carefully reviewed their plan in the small ridgepine cabin, none noticed the black car slowly passing by on the dirt road or the camera lens aimed at their silhouettes through the window. Night of the groundbreaking ceremony. The grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel shimmered with crystal chandeliers, packed with Bridgeford's elite. A giant banner hung center stage Sun Hill Plaza, illuminating the city's future. Nathan stood before the mirror in a restroom, adjusting his bow tie. Beside him, Vivian reapplied her lipstick, whispering, "Security is scanning everyone. Your father upped patrols after the message I sent. Is Lucas in position?" Nathan asked. Vivian nodded. "Back entrance just like we planned. Dr. Winters is here. Table 7. Sophie is upstairs with your mother, waiting for the signal." She hesitated. "But Nathan, he's different tonight. Uneasy. Strange." Nathan didn't get a chance to respond before his phone buzzed. Text from Lucas. "Something's off. Security's asking for double ID verification. Plan B." Before Nathan could reply, the door burst open. Two men in suits, earpieces in, entered briskly. "Mr. Hale, your father requests your presence backstage. Immediately?" Nathan glanced at Vivian. This wasn't part of the plan. Backstage. Gerald Hale was adjusting a stack of prepared remarks, his tuxedo flawless, seeing his son. He motioned for his assistant to leave. "Son," he said, voice eerily calm, "before things begin, I thought we should have a little talk." He handed Nathan a glass of whiskey. "To a new beginning." Nathan didn't drink. "What is this?" Dad Gerald smiled the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "The day I adopted you, many thought I was crazy. Why not have a child of my own? Why raise someone else's?" He paced around Nathan like a lion circling prey. "But I saw potential. Under enough pressure. With the right molding, you could become anything I needed." "You could become what I needed," Gerald said, his voice smooth as silk. "An heir," Nathan replied, his tone ice cold. "No, an extension of my vision and legacy," Gerald corrected, setting down his glass without taking a sip. "So," he continued, "imagine my disappointment when you started sneaking off to meet disgraced nurses, orphaned children, digging into a past that should have stayed buried." "I know everything," Nathan said, heart pounding but voice steady. "About Sophie and Elizabeth. About what you did." Gerald shrugged. "I merely protected my interests. In business, contingency is necessary. Those were children. Your own daughters." Nathan nearly roared. "They were assets," Gerald snapped back, his voice so cold it chilled the air. "Just like you. Just like that little mechanic girl you're hiding." Nathan felt the blood freeze in his veins. "If you've touched Sophie, Sophie." Gerald laughed. "Ah, you mean Lily, no. She's still safe for now." He glanced at his watch. "The ceremony starts in 5 minutes. You have two choices. Nathan, stand beside me, as planned. Announce your engagement to Vivian. Accept your inheritance at Hale Consortium, or watch everything you have fall apart. Nathan quietly stepped back toward the door. The one who's going to fall is you. Before you go, Gerald said, lowering his voice with menace. Did your mother ever tell you why I chose you to adopt? Out of hundreds of orphans, Nathan turned. What are you talking about? Gerald smiled this time without hiding the threat in it. Go ahead with your little stunt tonight. Then you'll see how deep the Hale family secrets go, even ones you never knew were about you. The PA system crackled overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man behind the vision of Sun Hill Plaza, Mr. Gerald Hale. Thunderous applause erupted. Gerald stepped onto the stage in his flawless tuxedo, exuding power and charisma. Nathan melted into the crowd, eyes scanning for Vivian. He spotted her near the catering exit, face tense. He knows everything, Nathan whispered. He threatened Sophie. Vivian slipped a small USB into his hand. Then we have nothing left to lose. I downloaded all internal emails, correspondence with doctors, surveillance logs on Sophie. It's all on here. Gerald's voice boomed through the room, and proud to introduce the Sun Hill Plaza project, a symbol of renewal for this historic district. Nathan glanced at Table 7. Dr. Winters gave a subtle nod. Lucas, dressed as a technician, sat at the AV control area. Everyone was in position. And now, Gerald continued, I invite my son, Nathan Hale, to join me in sharing the next chapter of our family and company's journey. Spotlights turned to Nathan. He walked toward the stage, each step heavier than the last, a lifetime of manipulation, deceit, and buried truths about to be revealed. Thank you, Father, Nathan said, holding the microphone. His voice trembled slightly, but his eyes were steady. Before we speak about Sun Hill Plaza, I'd like to share something about this land's past. Gerald's face visibly tightened. 15 years ago, Nathan continued, this was the site of Sun Hill House Orphanage. It was shut down suddenly. Records vanished. Children scattered. Whispers spread through the crowd. The screen behind began to shift. Lucas was uploading the visuals from his console. I found out the real reason. Nathan said, Sun Hill was just an orphanage. It was a hub for a system that exploited children for personal gain, unethical research, and genetic engineering. Gerald stepped forward, yanking the mic. My son is confused. Please, don't misunderstand. I have proof. Nathan cut him off, pointing at the screen now displaying documents, contracts, notes, genome charts, even photos of Sophie and Elizabeth. These records show that Gerald Hale separated a pair of twins at birth. He declared one dead and raised the other in secrecy as a contingency pawn. Gaffes erupted from the audience. A photographer's shutter clicked in rapid succession as Gerald froze, his eyes for the first time revealing genuine fear. You are, he stammered. Elizabeth Hale, Vivian confirmed calmly. Your biological daughter, the one you thought you could control by marrying me off to Nathan, but am no longer a pawn in your game. Gas spread like wildfire through the grand ballroom. The once glittering evening had turned into an unraveling of decades-old deception. That's impossible, Gerald muttered, shaking his head. You were declared dead. Your file was falsified. Vivian cut in, just like dozens of others. But I survived, and I found my way back. Nathan turned toward her, eyes wide with disbelief and something more recognition. Perhaps. You knew, he asked. Vivian gave a slight nod. Not when we first met. Not until recently, when I started putting the pieces together and saw the ruby ring Sophie wore. She held up her hand, revealing her own ruby identical to Sophie's and Olivia's. We all had one. Gerald tried to take a step forward, but the FBI agents tightened their grip on him. You manipulated every part of our lives, Nathan said, voice shaking. But even you couldn't break blood, and you certainly didn't account for truth and timing. Agent Morris from the FBI pulled out a sealed folder. We have warrants to seize all corporate servers, offshore accounts, and private research facilities under the Hale Consortium. Dr. Winters stepped to the mic, and ill testify to every document, every unethical trial, every falsified adoption. Catherine stood beside her, and ill testify to what I witnessed and why I risked everything to save Lily. The media swarmed closer, microphones raised, flashes blinding. Gerald was escorted off the stage, his once proud stride replaced by a shuffle of defeat. Olivia walked slowly toward Nathan and Sophie, reaching out to both. I spent years thinking I'd lost both my daughters, she whispered, tears streaming, and now they're both here, alive. Vivian stepped forward, standing beside Sophie. She's your sister, Olivia said to Nathan. You were meant to protect them both, and now maybe you finally can. Sophie looked up at Nathan. So, we're really a family? He knelt down, wiping a tear from her cheek. We always were. We just didn't know it yet, Vivian added, smiling softly. A family built on truth, not control. The ballroom, once a monument to the Hale Empire's grandeur, now bore witness to its reckoning. Later that night, the Hale Tower lights flickered off one by one. What once symbolized invincibility now stood as a hollow shell stripped of lies, humbled by justice, and somewhere, in the silence between victory and mourning, a new legacy began. A scream echoed through the ballroom. Reporters jostled for position, cameras pointed at the stage, desperate not to miss the spectacular collapse of the Hale Empire. Outside, satellite vans lined both sides of the street. By morning, major newspapers ran the same explosive headline, Real Estate Empire Built on Family Secrets and Crimes. The stock market opened in chaos. Shares of Hale Development Group plummeted. Trade partners pulled out. Contracts were canceled. Business relationships built over decades unraveled in days. The following days blurred into a haze of interrogations, subpoenas, and press sieges. Eventually, Nathan, Olivia, Sophie, and Vivian retreated to a quiet mountain home up north, secured by a hand-picked protection team led by Lucas himself. A week after the devastating gala, the group gathered in the living room, quietly watching the latest news broadcast. The board of directors has officially voted to permanently remove Gerald Hale's name from all company projects. Vivian reported, the Sunshine Plaza project has been indefinitely suspended. The FBI was expanding its investigation into the corporation's medical division, where disturbing evidence of human genetic experimentation had surfaced. Curled up on the sofa beside Olivia, Sophie asked softly, So, what happens now? The question was filled with both fear and fragile hope. Nathan gazed out the window, the serene countryside stretching before him, a sharp contrast to the Manhattan skyline that had once defined his entire life. The company will be restructured under court supervision, he said. Most assets will be liquidated to compensate victims, and Gerald Lucas asked, still posted near the front door like an invisible gatekeeper of the family. Denied bail, Nathan replied. Too many powerful people are turning witness for immunity. Even his board is abandoning him. Catherine finally spoke, her voice gentle but charged with emotion. And you, Nathan, now that the world knows the truth about where you come from, what will you do? It was a question he'd asked himself every night since that fateful evening. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. I don't know, but for the first time in my life, I get to choose, and so do all of us. As the sun set, they sat together, no longer people under Gerald Hale's control, but a group reclaiming their lives from the shadows. The empire Gerald had built through manipulation and lies had crumbled overnight. But from its ashes, something far more precious had begun to form truth, freedom, and real family. The two ruby ring-on symbols of Gerald's twisted plans now represented a bond that had survived every attempt to break it. 6 months later, the Hale scandal had largely faded from the front pages, but its aftershocks continued to ripple through financial and legal circles. Gerald remained in custody, awaiting trial. The company was being dismantled piece by piece under judicial oversight. On a crisp autumn morning, Nathan stood on the empty lot where the Haven Hills orphanage had once stood. Construction equipment now sat idle, coated in dust. The Sunshine Plaza project had been officially scrapped. A for sale sign flapped in the wind. The Hale Development logo was gone. What are you thinking about? Lucas asked, stepping up beside Nathan at the fence line. Nathan gave a faint smile. Purpose. This land used to represent control and manipulation. Now I want to build something different. You've got the chance now, Lucas said. The settlement left you with enough to start again, even if most of your inheritance went to restitution. Nathan nodded. Though he wasn't directly responsible for Gerald's crimes, he had voluntarily relinquished the majority of his inheritance to fund a victims' restitution foundation. The court, however, had still granted him authority over a handful of untainted assets, just enough to begin again on his own terms. I've been talking with the city council, Nathan continued. They're open to rezoning this land if I can present a strong enough proposal. They're considering rezoning the land for community use instead of upscale commercial development, Nathan said, eyes fixed on the overgrown field that once housed the Haven Hills orphanage. Lucas nodded, a flicker of understanding lighting his expression. A community center. Maybe with a job training program for kids aging out of foster care. Exactly. Nathan turned to him, teaching mechanical skills, offering mentorship, legal and mental health support. I need someone who knows their way around machines to head up the auto repair program. Lucas chuckled. Are you offering me a job? Hale Collins, Nathan corrected gently, but with firm conviction. I legally changed my name last week. Sarah gave me a family when she didn't have to. Taking her last name is how I honor that. They left the fence line, heading toward an old SUV, no longer the luxury sedans Nathan used to drive. The car took them back to a modest 3-acre farmstead on the outskirts of town, far enough from the shadow of the past, and just wide enough for a different kind of family. In the kitchen flooded with soft afternoon light, Sophie now used to both her names. Sophie and Lily was working on a science project for her new school with Olivia and Catherine. The two women, once strangers, now sat shoulder to shoulder, laughing like old friends, united by a deep love for the little girl who had forever altered their destinies. Vivian arrived a bit late for dinner, dressed simply and smiling in a way that no longer carried the chill of high society poise. She was no longer the heiress to the Huntington Hotel legacy, but the founder of a non-profit dedicated to reuniting families torn apart by adoption fraud. Good news, she announced over dessert. The Sunshine Memorial Foundation was officially granted nonprofit status today. We can start accepting donations. Applause broke out around the table. Nathan, Vivian, Catherine, and Lucas know a tight-knit team had decided to use their scars not as excuses, but as blueprints to build something healing. Vivian turned to Sophie. The scholarship program for orphaned youth is almost ready too. We're calling it the Nathan Hale Scholarship. Sophie beamed, pride lighting her eyes. At just 10 years old, she'd insisted on helping design parts of the program, especially those for children. Her perspective had made it more grounded, more human. Late that night, Nathan found her on the front porch swing, gazing at the stars. "Big day tomorrow," he said, taking a seat beside her. "First day at my new school." Sophie nodded. "Do you think they'll ask about me? About the news about Mr. Hale?" Nathan paused, then answered, "Maybe. But you don't owe anyone an explanation. Remember, family is always about blood. It's about the people who love you and the ones you choose to love back." Sophie smiled softly. "Like us. We chose each other." Nathan nodded, heart swelling with quiet warmth. 6 months ago, his life was a gilded Cajun engagement built on lies, a company run by a tyrant. Now, he sat beside a child he'd protect with his life, surrounded by a family bound not by contracts, but by choice, and no amount of money could buy that. Outside the barn-turned workshop they were restoring, a freshly painted mural read together, "We build a new future. No more control. No more manipulation. Just truth, freedom, and the courage to begin again." Sophie leaned her head against Nathan's shoulder. In that moment, he understood. The fall of the Hale Empire wasn't an ending. It was the beginning. 1 year later, the land once set aside for luxury condos now echoed with the laughter of locals, children, and former victims. Instead of mansions and shopping centers, the Haven Hills Memorial Center officially opened that morning, its ribbon-cutting ceremony simple but deeply meaningful. No politicians, no media frenzy, just survivors, healers, and people who had stood together through the storm. Dressed in a plain shirt and khakis, Nathan Collins stood on a makeshift stage and began. "A year ago, many of us were strangers. But today, we gather not to relive our pain, but to celebrate what we've rebuilt from the ruins." Behind him, new buildings stood tall classrooms, counseling offices, trade workshops, and a hands-on auto garage. At the heart of the campus sat a quiet garden, centered around a memorial stone for the children who once called Haven Hills home. "This center proves," Nathan continued, "that the future doesn't have to be built on fear or control, but on compassion, trust, and the right choices. All of this, what once seemed impossible, had now become reality." Nathan Collins, formally. Reynolds stood at the podium, dressed simply in a pale blue shirt and khakis. His face had softened over the past year. Gone was the sharp gaze of a corporate executive. In its place was the calm, resolute look of a man who had lost everything and chosen to live again through truth. 1 year ago, Nathan began, his voice clear across the wide courtyard adorned with flags and community members. "We were strangers, connected only by secrets and the scars left by a man obsessed with control. But today, we gather not to dwell on that past, but to celebrate what we've built from its ashes." He gestured behind him to the newly completed main building of the Haven Hills Memorial Center. The campus now included a school, a technical training workshop, counseling and legal aid offices, and dedicated family support spaces. At the center was a peaceful memorial garden, honoring those who had been harmed by the Reynolds Empire. "Haven Hills is not a new empire," Nathan continued. "It's a new legacy, built not on deception or manipulation, but on transparency, healing, and genuine connection. Everyone who walks through these doors will receive support without conditions, opportunities without exploitation." In the front row, Sophie, now 11, sat between Olivia and Catherine, her eyes full of quiet pride. She had grown into both her names Sophie and Lilino, longer a pawn in a legacy of power, but the heart of a family forged by truth. Beside them sat Vivian, no longer a socialite, but a brave woman who had stood up and helped bring down Richard Hale, a man who once held an entire city in his grip. Lucas stood just off stage, arms crossed in quiet vigilance, a habit forged from a life spent protecting what mattered most. He was now director of the center's technical program, mentoring teens aging out of foster care, not just teaching them how to fix cars, but how to believe in themselves. "I want to thank those who made this day possible," Nathan said, his eyes scanning the crowd, pausing at each familiar face. Lucas Collinsa, man of unwavering loyalty and courage. Catherine Collinsa, mother, who risked her life for a child not of her blood, but of her heart. Olivia, woman who stayed silent for decades, then chose to speak when it mattered most. Vivian, who chose truth over privilege. Then he turned, eyes softening as he looked at Sophie, and especially this young girl who reminded us that in a world unraveling, kindness is the thread that holds everything together. Sophie smiled and stepped up beside him. Together, they cut the red ribbon, officially opening the center. The courtyard erupted in applause. There were no champagne glasses or crystal chandeliers, just the honest joy of a community built not by wealth, but by sincerity. Later that afternoon, Nathan found Sophie sitting alone on a stone bench in the memorial garden, turning the old ruby ring between her fingers. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting beside her. Sophie looked up. "This ring. Everything started with it. When you recognized it that day. But it's also tied to everything bad Richard did." Nathan nodded. "Objects only hold the meaning we give them. This ring once symbolized division. But in the end, it brought us back together. That makes it something good, born from something broken." Sophie was quiet for a while, then slowly took off the ring. "I think it belongs here, in the memorial, so people remember the story." "That's a beautiful idea," Nathan said, his heart full of pride. They walked together to the small glass display case at the garden center filled with photographs and artifacts from the old Haven Hills orphanage. Sophie carefully placed the ring inside, its ruby catching the fading sunset. "Not to remember what was awful," Sophie whispered, "but to remember that good things can still happen, like finding my family." That evening, the entire family gathered for dinner in their quiet farmhouse surrounded by fields, once a hiding place, now a true home. Laughter filled the room, a sound none of them could have imagined just a year ago. There was no fear, no more secrets. They were there together because they had chosen one another. And tomorrow, they would keep choosing together. Late that night, after a warm family dinner, Nathan Collins stepped out onto the front porch, a small oak box in his hands. The family followed quietly behind him, the soft moonlight casting long shadows across the worn wooden steps of their hillside home. Inside the box was a simple silver ring, not precious or radiant like the ruby ring from before, but meaningful in its quiet simplicity. "Not something to own," Nathan said, locking eyes with Sophie, "but something to remind us that family isn't imposed. It's something we choose to build together." Sophie took the ring, slipping it onto her finger for the first time. It fit perfectly. She smiled. Around her, one by one, Lucas, Catherine, Olivia, Vivian, and finally, Nathan each removed an identical silver ring from a cuff, a necklace, or a chain. Without a word, they all slipped the rings onto their own fingers. They weren't flashy. They weren't loud. but they carried a silent, unwavering promise. We are a family, not because of blood, but because we chose to be. The night passed gently, with the group sitting on the porch, telling small and scattered stories, dreaming of what lay ahead. No one mentioned Richard Hale anymore, the man who had once held power over every single one of their lives. He was still in custody, awaiting trial. His empire, once ironclad, now reduced to broken files in an open investigation. But in their lives, he no longer existed. They had moved past what he left behind. They were no longer victims, but survivors. People who had chosen to begin again. People who had found a different path. The Haven Hills Memorial Center stood now as a living testament to that path. Not just a construction project, but a symbol of a road thought lost but rediscovered, of people once divided, now reunited, of wounds once deep but slowly healing, and of a family not born but built. Nathan looked around the porch at the people he loved. Sophie, her head resting on Catherine's shoulder. Olivia, laughing softly as she told Vivian a story from her youth. Lucas, quietly pouring more tea into everyone's mugs. Nathan had never felt more whole than in that moment. He didn't need glass towers or elevators lined with gold. He didn't need spotlights or headlines. All he needed was this: these people who had lost and still chose love. Sophie caught his gaze and smiled. A calm smile, not the wary look of a child who had once lived in a world of deception, but the smile of a child who knew without a doubt that she was truly, deeply loved. The ruby ring, the object that had once tied all of them together, now rested behind glass in the center's memorial wing, left in the past where it belonged. But on their fingers were silver rings, symbols of a new vow, a future unwritten but freely chosen, and a path forward together, in a world where power often silences truth. One girl's courage helped rewrite the legacy of an entire empire. From a roadside encounter to a courtroom revelation, Emily's story reminds us that family is not about bloodlines, wealth, or status. It's about love, protection, and the people who choose to stand by us when the world turns its back. A ruby ring once used to control now rests as a symbol of healing and new beginnings. But let's not forget the hard truth behind this journey. No child should ever be treated like a pawn. No human being should be defined by where they come from or how much money they have. Discrimination, exploitation, and secrecy must never be the foundation of legacy. This story may have found peace, but so many others in the real world are still searching for theirs. What did this story make you feel? Who in your life has chosen you? Not out of duty, but out of love. Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. If this story moved you even for a moment, don't forget to like this video. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that love can rewrite the past. And subscribe to our channel for more emotional, powerful journeys just like this one. Because every story matters. And sometimes it only takes one person to change everything.